接受志工。那我刚刚听到馆长他对于说利物浦博物馆的一个成功的案例，那我了解说一座成功的博物馆可以是一个城市魅力的来源。那像毕尔包的那个美术馆一样，那我想要提问的就是说，那利物浦博物馆它是一个成功的案例嘛？那因为你们不收门票，不晓得说，那你们在收入及营运模式上，还有扩充展览品，还有你们如何去或者说你们有以什么样的模式进行博物馆的经营跟管理？那能够永续的去经营说这个博物馆，还有说你们博物馆跟当地居民的关系，就是居民的立场，他们是很乐于作为一个志工呢，还是说他也是博物馆的一个助力？或者说当初你们在设立博物馆的时候是一个什么样的契机？那当地居民的一个看法是怎么样？那我的问题在这里，谢谢。
我们是一个一个看，好，这样比较大家说清楚。OK， and Director, Fleming, you want to answer this question?
It's working. Yes. It's red.
Working. Good. Thank you for your question. The economics is government funded. Okay, £20 million approximately from central government. The difficulty, of course, is that central government sees no reimbursement of this money, so it becomes part of the public sector, public provision. But the point that the politicians who agree that money need to know is how much it generates in activity. So it's a good deal, but we only earn £1 million a year ourselves through shops and catering and so on. The business model, therefore, is predicated on money coming from government, and then we operate so successfully that the audiences are huge, and particularly in the case of national politicians, they want to know, do overseas tourists come? Is it worthwhile investing the money because we earn more money back from foreign tourists? And the answer is yes, yes you do. In terms of measurement, I've always used the cost per visitor. How much does the museum service cost in real terms? How many visitors? And our aim is always to have a low cost per visitor. So you probably won't be surprised to hear that Liverpool has the lowest cost per visitor of any of the UK's national museums. So that's the message I give back to the Minister who votes for the funding. The very low cost per visitor, that's because we're very, very popular. Okay? If we weren't popular, it would be much more difficult to argue for the funding. You said about interaction between museums and the community. How many volunteers, for example? We have more volunteers than we do staff. We have several hundred, about 700 volunteers. But more importantly than that 700 people is the way in which people who live around the city get to know the museum, they read about the museum, they use the museum, sometimes they have a proper involvement in what's happening in the museum. This is a long-term process. This is exactly the point of my paper, that if you work very hard over a number of years, eventually everybody who lives near the museum regards it as their museum. This is my museum. My museum loves me, I love my museum. This is the relationship that we're trying to develop. And in fact, as I said to Peter yesterday before I heard his paper, although I had looked at his written paper in the book, which is very good too, but loving the Museum of Liverpool is precisely and overtly what we set out to make people want to do. I remember saying to our staff 8 years ago, Liverpool people must love this museum. If they don't love the museum, then we've all failed. There's even an exhibition on right now called Liverpool Love, as it happens. It happens to be an exhibition of various art forms. you said the reasons for the community to welcome the museum. I think in that respect you meant what's the reaction be? Well, of course, until the museum was open, nobody really knew what was going to be there. Many people used to say to me, what's going to be in the museum? And my answer was always, it's about Liverpool. And they said, yes, but what's going to be in it? And I eventually realised that what they meant was, we think of a museum as a place with things. Is it going to have Chinese ceramics in the museum? Well, actually, the answer to that is yes, because Chinese ceramics form part of the life of the Chinese community in Liverpool. So there are lots of Chinese material in there. But the most important thing is not what the museum has in it, but the relationship between the museum and the people who live nearby, all of whom essentially appear to have used the museum in its first year of opening. It's absolutely key to the role of the museum. The reasons that they welcome it are because it's about them. It's their story. It's not somebody else's story. It's not the story of the ancient Egyptians. It's not the story of the United States Civil War. It's the story of people's lives in Liverpool. And that's why it has a special relationship with the people who live in the city.
Another question?
Hi, Mr. Fleming. I'm Jessie, major in European culture and tourism, and I'm wondering that as your Museum of Liverpool is a civic museum which aims to be well representative of the local society, and as far as I know that Liverpool has to be a very cosmopolitan city for over 100 years. So how can you determine the proportion of exhibition for each community? I mean, when I interviewed some of your local inhabitants, especially those from the Irish background, they are pretty criticize the percentage of the exhibition in your museum. And another question, just another one, is about all-star image, like the Beatles or the football teams. Some of the inhabitants, they are also criticized that those images are like 30 years ago. And right now, Liverpool has become a different, new, vibrant city. And they wonder why the museum has such percentage of exhibition on the old-time image. They would like the museum maybe have some sort of a different, new, diversified image of the Liverpool. So that's the two questions I would like to ask.
Okay,
thank you.
Is the first question, the answer to that is you can't really, if you want to complain about a museum, you kind of have to visit it for 10 years and then you can complain. It's interesting you mentioned the Irish complaints, because yes, there have been complaints, there are always complaints in Liverpool. This is the nature of the city, believe me. If you find it upsetting to have people criticising what you do, don't go live there. You have to be very tough. But the specifics of the question, I said earlier on that Liverpool is very strongly influenced by Irish people. Half of my staff who are from Liverpool have Irish names, like Duffy and Corcoran, etc., etc. The famous Liverpool football team is full of Irish names, like Gerrard and Carragher. The Beatles have Irish names, Lennon and McCartney. It's very, very strong element, strong influence. It's difficult to imagine where else a city, particularly, is like that. But right at the moment, there is very little on Irishness in Liverpool. But we have got an exhibition on the Welsh. Okay? Now the Irish are complaining because the Welsh are in the museum. The Jews are complaining because the Welsh are in the museum. Where's the Jewish history? So I regard this as positive feedback. They want to be in the museum. Well, they're not in now because there's not room for everybody. But if you come back next year or the year after, and if you work with the museum, then maybe your community story will be specially featured. For example, in the little museum that we closed, that was the predecessor of this big new museum, we had an exhibition on the Indian community which lives in Liverpool. It you can't do everything at once. This is the nature of City Museum. This is a big city with thousands and thousands and thousands of stories, and we can only deal with some at any given time. But my promise is always to people, it's going to come. If that's what you want to see, it will be here one day. And it's the same response to everybody who lives in and around Liverpool. So there will be an Irish exhibition there when we can afford, when the politicians give us some more money. This is of course my own. The other interesting question about people. I know you have been to the museum. You have interviewed people. So I guess somebody has said, what about modern Liverpool? Well, there's lots of modern Liverpool in there, but it's a story of an 800-year-old city. So inevitably there's lots of history. But I think what sometimes happens is that people don't like the idea that their city is portrayed in anything other than a very positive way. I would say sanitised way. Liverpool has been a very unpleasant place for people to grow up in since the Second World War. Okay? That's life. That's the story of the city. It's not like Chelsea in London or somewhere like that. It's been a very difficult place to grow up. The museum has to reflect this difficult story. It's like slavery. Some people say, why do you talk about slavery? That's finished 200 years ago. Why didn't you talk about modern Liverpool? Well, we're historians. We have to talk about the whole story. Otherwise you cannot explain modern Liverpool. Modern Liverpool is the result of its history, of its influences, of people coming to live there, of people leaving there, of the slave trade. So all this is part of what has to be in the museum. And there will always be some people, particularly in Liverpool, I keep looking at something I don't know why. There will always be arguing what we're doing, and I say to our staff, this is a good thing. If they're sufficiently passionate to argue about the museum, but they're visiting in huge numbers, then we're probably doing a good job. Because if they weren't arguing, there'd be something very wrong. Okay?
Can I just disagree completely with David there? No, I think the one thing which I just wanted to say about that contemporary view of Liverpool is that don't forget that although David is in charge of a wonderful range of museums, there are also many other cultural institutions in Liverpool as well. There's the Blue Coat Art Gallery, there's the Open Art, there's FACT, there's the Tate. Any more? Do anyone have been built recently? Well, all of these will have contemporary views of Liverpool as well as views of everything else as well. So you can't blame the museums of Liverpool for not showing everything. I can, because I'm from Liverpool. I'm allowed to say that. Nice try, Dave. Okay, pal.
Let's thank you, Director.